Oh, you said you're not going to.
Why were you thinking not?
Okay.
So what he says doesn't stay in forever.
Yes. All right, let's begin with our bracha. Baruch atah
Adonai Eloheinu melech
Elohim
haolam, yetzirah b'mitzvot,
Torah. Excellent. All right. So how fun that we're beginning the cycle of Torah over again. You studied with Rabbi Vogel last week and the week before Breshit and Noah. Today we're going to be looking at the story of Abraham and Lech Lecha. And I was going to actually look at the beginning of the Torah portion when God calls to Abraham, but we know the story so well and we're so familiar with it that I decided to take a look at something else. Sarai and Hagar and their relationship, and ask ourselves the question, is there anything that we can learn about today, geopolitical issues? Is there anything we can learn about being better human beings? Is there anything that we can learn about how to talk to people that we love from the exchange looking at today? Does that work for everybody? I guess I shouldn't ask that question, because if it doesn't work, I got nothing else prepared. This is what we're doing. So let me share my screen. Okay, hold on. Let me make all of you bigger so that I can see all of you. Okay. You can see the screen, right? That says Torah for today, texts and questions based upon. Do you all see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so here is the section of the Torah that we want to look at. Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne no children. She had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. Sarai said to Abraham, "Look, the Lord has kept me from bearing. Consort with my maid. Perhaps I shall have a son through her." And Abraham heeded Sarai's request. So Sarai,
I don't understand that.
go ahead, Mort.
I don't understand her statement, and it always puzzled me. I shall have a son through her. What does that say about Hagar, or is Hagar a non-person?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but again, we have to not impose our values of the way that we understand society working today with the values in ancient times. And the value in ancient times, Hagar was a maid servant to Sarai, a slave, more or less, which means, Mort, she did not have power. Her womb was not her womb. Her womb was Sarai's womb. And therefore, if Sarai wanted to have a child and Hagar was the carrier of that child, the way in which today you have surrogacy, but it's a little bit different than today's surrogacy, but it's the same idea. If I implant my sperm and egg from my wife into a woman who's going to carry that child for us because my wife can't get pregnant, that child is not the child of the woman who was the surrogate. She's our child. This was, in ancient times, surrogacy, the way they could do it. So, clearly, Sarah can't get pregnant. So she says, I can't take my egg and sperm together and implant it into Hagar. So you do the work and you get her pregnant, and it will still be my child. Does that help, Mort? Okay, so Sarai, Abraham's wife, took her maid, Hagar, the Egyptian, after Abraham had dwelt in the land of Canaan 10 years, and gave her to her husband Abraham as concubine. He cohabitated with Hagar, she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was lowered in her esteem. Sarai said to Abraham, the wrong done me is your fault. Lauren, I'm going to mute you if that's okay. Okay. The wrong done me is your fault. I myself put my maid in your bosom. Now that she sees that she is pregnant, I am lowered in her esteem. The Lord decide between you and me. And Abraham said to Sarai, your maid is in your hands. Deal with her as you think right. Then Sarai treated her harshly, and she ran away from her. An angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the road to Shur, and said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? She said, I'm running away from my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said to her, go back to your mistress and submit to her harsh treatment. And the angel of the Lord said to her, I will greatly increase your offspring, and they shall be too many to count. The angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are with child, you shall bear a son, you shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord had paid heed to your suffering. He shall be a wild ass of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He shall dwell alongside all of his kinsmen. And she called the Lord who spoke to her, you are El Roi, by which she said, have I not gone unseen after he saw me? So that's the story. Let's start just with what are the questions that this story raises? Particularly, I want us to think about the question that it raises with regard to interpersonal relationships between Abraham and Sarah, Sarah and Hagar, Abraham and Hagar. Let's hear what you have to say. George, and then Judy, and then Stan.
Yeah, can you back it up?
I can do anything you want.
Whoa. Okay, I think it's number 3. Gave her to Avram as a concubine. In the Torah, it says Isha, Isha. Now, I know it means in this case as a concubine, but literally means as a wife. You know, it's a little higher. It's complicated in our thinking, but
So are you
Yeah.
suggesting, George?
I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just pointing out.
Well,
that
but no, let me
You got the word concubine and the word Isha, you know.
so let me ask you, might that then explain why Hagar reacts the way Hagar reacts? If she has been elevated to a wife and she's no longer a concubine, then she's going to act all uppity and she's going to say, I'm now the chosen wife over you.
Maybe. Well, she didn't read the interpretation here.
No, forget the interpretations. I'm saying you're making a really good point.
Yeah.
You're making a very good point by using the language of
The original.
it says by Tikach Sarai Eshet Avram, and Sarai took Eshet Avram et Hagar HaMitzri Shifchata. There it says her maid.
What line are you on?
V'titain otala Avraham Isha lo leisha. You're right.
Yeah.
To her as a woman.
To her husband as a wife.
So what you're saying is Hagar's behavior towards Sarah might very well have been justified because she sees herself as a full wife and not as a concubine.
Okay, I just raised a question. I wasn't giving an answer because we're searching here.
Okay, I think it's great. I think it's great, and I think it very well could explain Hagar's behavior. Judy,
But they,
Well,
go ahead, Eileen. Judy, hold on one second.
okay, but they don't say that Hagar was nasty or rude to Sarah. And why does she blame Abraham when she says that it's your fault and I gave her to you? So how is it his fault?
Well, it doesn't exactly show that Hagar is innocent, because look at verse 4.
But it doesn't say she was weird, bad.
What does it say? Her mistress was lowered in her esteem.
Yeah.
But that's on Sarah's opinion.
Well, so Sarah then says, Sarah says, what does Sarah
She's-
say?
She says the wrong done me is your fault. She says that to Abraham. And then she says, I myself put my maid in your bosom. And now that she's pregnant, I am lowered in her esteem, but that's only her feeling. That doesn't say anything that Hagar treated her bad.
Great. Okay. Right. So the text does not clarify what, if anything, Hagar did. And Eileen, you're suggesting that this is all Sarah's fault.
Well, she put her there.
She put her there in the first place, number one. And if she feels lower in esteem, it's because of her own doing.
Her opinion that because she didn't bear the child. So
Totally.
I don't see where Hagar treats her bad or anything.
Okay. Very good.
But my understanding is from something I read is that they never spoke again, the two women, to each other.
Well, I don't even think they speak here. They're not actually ever speaking to each other in the
Well,
Torah.
if she was a maid, she had to speak to her at one time as her
Yeah,
maid.
but there's no evidence from the Torah itself
Right.
that shows that. All right, Judy, and then Stan, and then Bob.
well, I think that they weren't studying Musar because the implications that of what could happen with this situation were kind of written on the wall. And I don't think Sarai thought it out. I don't think Abraham thought it out. And I think
So-
it was
So Judy, if you were to replay this moment when Sarah's feeling frustrated that she can't get pregnant, and she says to Abraham, consort with my maid, perhaps I shall have a son through her. If you are Abraham in that moment, Abraham heeded Sarai's request. What might Abraham have done instead?
I think he could have talked it out with her and made sure that's what she really wanted. And she knew what could happen as a result.
What motivated this? Do you remember? We didn't read it, but do you remember the promise that God made to Abraham? What was the promise God made to Abraham?
That you shall be the father.
Yeah.
That he would
Exactly.
have, that he would have
Offspring,
like starting a family, a nation, whatever. something like
Exactly. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of a great nation, that he would have offspring so many more than the stars in the sky and the sands of the earth. Sarah hears that. She's worried. She can't get pregnant. She wants this fulfillment of this promise that God made to Abraham. And she says, Abe, we got no choice. My womb is not working. So if you're going to be the father of a nation, you got to take my handmaiden because there's nobody else here to help you have children. At which point Abraham might say what?
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, great.
I mean, that would be, why would he say no? In those days, you had to have a child anyway.
Well,
So he
wait a
says,
minute,
okay.
wait a minute. Abraham,
He doesn't turn it down.
okay, so knowing the male,
But also the history of the times, you had to have somebody to carry on your name.
good, very good. So Abraham doesn't say no, but Abraham could have said no. He
Why
could have
not?
said no. And what might he have said if he said no?
I'll find somebody else.
Or,
I'll marry somebody else. They had many wives in those days.
okay, could have done that, or he could have maybe relied on the promise that God made and say, we don't know the whole story here. It's true you haven't gotten pregnant, but God made a promise to us and let's wait longer. I mean, it could have been any of those things. Let's keep going. Judy, you make a great point. So I think Stan was next, then Bob, and then Elon.
How many times, excuse me, have we ourselves made a suggestion or put into a plan for our family one way or another, and it didn't work out the way that we thought it would? And here we are, in a situation of our own doing that, we now have to resolve. It's not unusual to me in family relationships that this happens, that you think something's going to work out well and it doesn't.
Correct. And that's the beauty.
Exactly what-
Yeah, I thank you, Stan. And that's the beauty of the Torah. The Torah is real, right? These are real situations where there is jealousy and dynamics and fear and anxiety and all of the things that we feel every day of our lives, right, are being expressed in this story. And Stan reminds us, we do things and then we realize afterwards that we didn't understand the implications of our act, and they come back to bite us in the tuchus.
When
Wait, yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
when God made the promise, he didn't say how he was going to
No,
become the
correct.
so he didn't say you'll be the father, but it's not going to be with your wife. It's going to be with, so they didn't have enough faith. That was the thing. They didn't have enough faith in the promise to begin with. And
It seems like
that's where I have the problem. And it's kind of like a soap opera, dun, dun, dun.
it's not kind of like a soap opera.
It is a soap opera.
It
It
is
is a soap opera. And it is Sarah's fault because she gave this woman and then she expected everyone to be okay with it. You have to watch enough soap operas to know it's not going to be okay.
Yeah. Okay. It was after Stan, it was Bob, and then after Bob, Elon, and then Anita, and then Mort.
I just wanted to take another look at verse 4, where it said, we're talking about Hagar, and it clearly says that Hagar looked at Sarai with a lower esteem than she did before.
Yes, the Hebrew word is vatekal. She was less. She was less of a woman in her eyes.
Yeah. So there, Hagar has created a reversal of the social status between herself and Sarai. And that's the foundation for all the animosity that Sarai is going to have in the future.
Exactly, Bob. She has created a change in the social status. And no longer does she see herself as the concubine. Now she's carrying the child that slept with the boss. And therefore, she wants to be the first wife.
Right. And also, I wanted to ask if Hagar's child would then take inheritance precedence over any child that came from Sarai.
If Sarai was to have a second child afterward, if she was to have a child afterwards, if
Right.
the social status is reversed, you're absolutely right. Hagar's child would be the firstborn. And that would be majorly problematic.
Yeah.
Okay, after Bob, I think it was Elon, and then Anita, and then Mort, and then Jack. Go ahead, Elon, make sure you unmute. Unmute yourself.
I do, but I'm not my messenger.
Elon, you're still muted. There you go.
The thing is that God did not mention that Sarah will be the mother of the new nation that he gave. He never mentioned her name. So there was no reason for Abraham to assume it will be only with Sarah. And Sarah is the only mother. The other one is something else. So he had a reason to be mistaken. Now, what Sarah did and Abraham responded was according to Hammurabi law. there is a specific law for this case. When a wife cannot give a child to the master, she is giving her servant. The servant is not becoming a wife. She remains a servant. And here, Hagar thought that she is becoming a wife, and she can look down at Sarai at the time. And that was a mistake, and this is covered too in Hammurabi. In that case, she is returned to her master, the wife.
Her prior status.
Lower status to be, but she is not being, nobody is allowed to sell her anymore. But she is to be like any other servant. Now,
so wait, pause for 1 second, Elon. Does everybody understand what Elon is talking about when he says the Code of Hammurabi? That was a Mesopotamian law code, which biblical scholars often use as a way of saying that the Torah, the Hebrew text that we have, borrows from the Mesopotamian law codes of Hammurabi, but changes in many places the law code to reflect the Israelite faith as opposed to the Mesopotamian faith. But there's still, lessons learned from the culture in which they were living at the time.
Hagar didn't know it because she was Egyptian. She didn't know that she can go back to be a slave to Sarai. Now, once Sarai gives her a slave to Abraham, he is not allowed to take another wife or another concubine to get a child. He is bound by the decision of Hagar. That's again the law. It's clearly written there. So Hagar was treating her not nice. She thought that she became the first wife, and she thought her son has the right to be the firstborn, which is not true. Again, to Hammurabi law, the father, the master, can decide who will inherit his title and who will be the firstborn. It doesn't matter the order. King David selected Solomon to be his follower. And we have other examples, Yaakov and not Esau. So, and Abraham actually at the end gave everything to Isaac, not to Ishmael. So that's the law that he was bound to do whatever he wants, to whoever select. And God select Isaac. So that's what he was bound to do.
Thank you.
It was a very sad story, but in my opinion, God wanted to test Abraham before he was ready. He wanted to make him rich, to be a nasi, how you say it in English, it's not president, but to be respected person in the land, to win a war. And in my opinion, Ishmael was a son for practice, a practice child, to train Abraham to educate Isaac properly. And he passed the test, and Ishmael was a good boy.
So two comments that I want to just take from Elon. The one is similar to what Eileen said, that there was a lack of faith, that this is one of the many of the 10 tests that God put Abraham through. I promised you to be the father of a great nation. Do you have faith to wait until it happens? And, that's a question. And the second thing is, now I already forgot what the second thing was that I was going to talk about what you said. So if it comes back to me, it'll come back to me. Anita, make sure you unmute, Anita. There you go.
If the child, Hagar's child, was supposed to be Sarah's, why didn't she just take the infant and begin raising him in, the way that an infant should be raised in whatever is going to become the first Judaism?
Yeah.
Why did she leave him with Hagar?
That's a very good question.
And if that had happened, he could have been the legitimate heir. if he had been properly raised by Sarah slash Abraham. And I see Sarah's lack of knowing how to do this as the whole reason today we have a problem with the descendants of Ishmael. So I see this as one unfortunate huge story.
So much. Exactly. Like the biggest challenge in today's world can be traced to this moment of division within the family between Ishmael and Hagar and Sarah and Isaac, because Ishmael is the father, according to the Torah, of the Arab nation, and Isaac is the father of the Jewish nation. And here we see the beginnings of that conflict. Sarah doesn't choose to take the child and raise him as hers. Instead, she just exiles the child, not once, but twice. She exiles the child. She exiles the mother in this case. And I don't even know if she knows that she's pregnant at this point. And then later on, when Isaac is born, we know that she exiles Hagar and Ishmael altogether from the house. So,
Well,
Jack.
no.
As many others, I find this whole story very troubling on a lot of levels. And what strikes me is this notion in verse 4 that Hagar's mistress was lowered in Hagar's esteem. Robert Alter translates it as in her eyes. It's essentially the same thing. And what struck me is that Hagar thinks less of Sarah, I guess because what Sarah has done is really just awful. And that, and I understand that, they don't have, surrogacy, they have slavery, etc. But she's essentially said, okay, I can't have a child, so use Hagar, and Hagar is a slave, so Hagar has no agency whatever. And I wonder if Hagar looks at Sarah and says, what you're doing, you're using my body, and you as a woman should know better than to just let another woman basically be, cohabit with Abraham. And, what Sarah does here is just absolutely horrible. And so is, Avram. And I just, what's so strange about this is, so this whole thing happens, and then the angel tells Sarah, go back and submit to her harsh treatment. I mean, you think about great offspring and everything, but, where's the God of compassion and the God of justice and the God of the weak? Absent.
So we're going to get to you in a second, Elon, but I want to just hold on to something that Jack said, because what I did below is I want us to take a look at the Hebrew here for a second, where it says, Abraham said to Sarai, your maid is in your hand, deal with her as you think right. Sarai treated her harshly and she ran away from her. Can you see the word that I, highlighted? The te'aneha?
Yeah.
Okay, so the root of that is what? Ana or inui. And what does that mean?
Humble.
No, that's anava. Here is affliction. It's the same word that appears on Yom Kippur in Leviticus when it says to us that we're supposed to afflict our souls. Inui nefesh. So Sarah afflicts Hagar, treats her harshly as the English translation. She runs away from her. Now, right before Genesis 16, there's this passage in Genesis 15 when God is offering this promise to Abraham. And look what it says. Look what it says here. Vayomer Lavraham, know, right? God says to know well, your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs. They shall be enslaved and oppressed. There's that word again, va'anu. They will be oppressed for 400 years. Then look in Exodus. They set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And in Deuteronomy, the Egyptians dealt harshly. There's that same word, inui, harshly, and the Lord heard our plea from our misery and our oppression. So the very thing that we are going to suffer in Egypt, Jack, you're saying is caused by the behavior of Abraham and Sarah to Hagar in this story.
Well, I would even say that you've raised something in my mind that the reaction of God is different when God sees what Sarah and Hagar, what's going on between Sarah and Hagar. God's response to Hagar is different than God's response to the Hebrews in Egypt.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know that because the Hebrews suffered in slavery for 400 years. It took a long time for God to respond.
But eventually.
Eventually. Well, God responds eventually to Hagar also.
But I don't know whether God does, because God says, yes, your child will be, have his own nation, but you have to go and suffer. You have to go be treated harshly.
Well, okay, fair enough. Take a look at the Ramban, which I bring you, because the Ramban, I think, in many ways is saying that is leading us to the same conclusion that Jack is offering. And then we're going to go back to you, Elon. But Ramban says, our mother Sarah, he doesn't mince words here, folks. Our mother Sarah transgressed by this affliction, as did Abraham, by allowing her to do so. Exactly what Jack just said. And Ramban is no slouch. We're talking about a major commentator who is challenging what Abraham and Sarah, our matriarch and patriarch, did to Hagar. So God heard her affliction, gave her a son who would be a wild ass of a man to afflict the seed of Abraham and Sarah with all kinds of afflictions. Anita, your comment, right? There it is, Ramban, who's living in a period of time where there is conflict between Jews and others. And he's saying the same thing that you said, Anita, that we're facing today. The same challenge between Muslims and Jews, between Arabs and Jews, even though they're actually half brothers, if you look at Ishmael and Isaac. Okay, so we're gonna go back to Elon, then George, then Lauren. Go ahead, Elon. Jack, thank you for those comments.
The first thing is, I'm just hearing things and I just want to correct or adjust it a little. When Ishmael was born, or when the angel told Hagar, go back.
Right here.
God heard you and your son will be called Ishmael. Hagar came back and announced, a malach saw me, it's not in the Bible, and his name of my son will be Ishmael. And that's why Abraham named him Ishmael.
And by the way, just so that everybody knows, what does Ishmael mean?
God heard you and God names in him.
Exactly. God heard me. Ishmael, God heard me.
At that moment, Sarah lost the right to own Ishmael. God owns Ishmael. The one who gives name is the owner, and Ishmael belongs to God. When God, same with Isaac. Isaac does not belong to Abraham or to Sarah. He belongs to God. God gave him the name Isaac. And then when she's sending her to the desert, actually, she's sending her to be free. She's free from slavery. Her son will not inherit the land or the title of Abraham, but she is a free woman. And God then gave her, after a torture a little, he gave her a well. having a well is like having an oasis in the desert. Now you have a territory. You can protect it as a arrow shooters, and you are very rich. You have water in the desert. It's a wonderful gift, and that's what she got. Now,
Wait, hold on a second, Elon. I just want to make sure. So what Elon is referencing is later on, we see when Sarah gives birth to Isaac, she is afraid for Isaac. She sees Ishmael playing with him in some way that she finds to be dangerous. So again, she goes to Abraham and she says, Abraham, kick out that woman and her son. So Abraham exiles them. What Elon is suggesting is giving them their freedom. And then the reward that Hagar gets is in the moment where she puts her son down, Ishmael, thinking he's going to die. The angel opens up her eyes and she sees that she's near a well of water, and that well of water becomes her property, which will allow her to become a wealthy individual in a world where typically women had no power and no rights. And therefore her son will become wealthy as well. And this was the gift that God gave to Hagar for enduring Sarah's harsh oppression for the years that she went back.
just one a little thing. We look at Ishmael, it's a Muslim, in a bad eye because they gave us hard time. But we have to remember that in Spain, the Jews in Spain and in Iraq and in Iran for thousands of years were prosperous. They were in wonderful, himself in Egypt, he was a doctor of the king, and he was taking care of the women, a Jew taking care of the women of the king. It's unbelievable honor. So, but then you have to see in the God's eyes, he wanted to spread our Torah to all the nations of the world. And the Jews were not so eager to do it, in my opinion. They were kind of holding back. And then Jesus, the Jew, came and continued our process, and Muhammad came from his side, and he spread our Torah. When they say Allah, it's our Allah. When the Christians say God, it's our God. It's our writing. It's our laws. So in view of God, there were a lot of progress, and half of the world is now believing in our God, God of Abraham, in his Torah, in his thing. Now, we do have fighting between brothers, and we will have to resolve it. And the Abraham peace is such a magnificent thing that it's mentioning Abraham.
Yeah,
we'll have peace.
it is nice that, thank you, Elon. It is nice that they called at the Abraham Accords when Israel made peace with the Gulf states for that very reason. Okay, who was next? Who did I say was next? George, and then Lauren, and then Nancy, and then Stan.
Yeah.
And then Mort.
Yeah, can you go back to number 9?
Yeah.
Okay, now what did you say Anan meant? Anan, whatever it was.
Inui, affliction. Affliction.
Okay, now, but if you look at the Hebrew, look at the Hebrew there.
In verse 9.
Yes.
Vayomer la malach Adonai shuvi el gvirtecha v'hit ani.
Okay, hit ani. What is that?
Ani, it's the same word.
No, it isn't.
It is. It's the same.
It's a hit pael.
It's a hit
male command. Okay. Now I've got a dictionary here, but it means to humble oneself, be afflicted, or to fast. The pael is afflict. Okay, it's a different binyan.
So God is suggesting. So God is suggesting, according to George, that Hagar is not going to suffer from affliction. She's going to suffer from humbling herself.
Even submit. That's
submitting.
Close, you know.
Okay, but
what that interpretation is.
That's fine. That you can look at it that way. That doesn't then necessarily change what Sarah did to her.
No,
Because
but
the way the Torah understands the word inui with the examples that I gave is affliction. It's not just humility.
yeah, but it's the command form of the
No, that's great.
okay. It's,
That's a fantastic insight, George.
Oh.
Fantastic.
told you.
Thank you. Thank you. Lauren, and then I think Nancy after that, and then Stan.
So I'm thinking, okay. So Sarah couldn't get pregnant. Do you think she needed like reassurance from Abraham that said, this is okay, we'll keep trying. I still love you. You're still my wife. Instead of like, well, let's find somebody else who's going to carry my child. I mean, some of the blame, a lot of the blame, I think, lies with him. Like finding somebody else to carry a child that they're going to pass off as theirs. And I'm not a psychiatrist, but it's like maybe some of the anger towards Hagar was really her anger towards Abraham, because she was angry that he didn't reassure her that, no, that's ridiculous. But, we're going to believe in God and we're going to have our own baby. I mean, if you bring into modern times, if a wife could forget about surrogacy and IVF, but if, let's say it's the 60s or the 70s, if a wife couldn't get pregnant, the husband would say, well, let's find somebody else who's going to get pregnant. I'm going to have somebody else carry a baby for us. I mean, the whole thing doesn't make sense. So that's where I'm coming from.
Lauren, I think that's an excellent insight. Excellent. And I do believe that, you could argue that this whole thing rests on Abraham, because Abraham could have said, you know what, Sarah, don't worry about it. You know what? I love you regardless of whether we have a child, and I don't want to take your handmaiden, and that's only going to cause problems in our marriage. And that's not a solution. And yeah, no question. And Ramban sees it also.
Yeah,
absolutely. Nancy.
I'm just not understanding the whole idea of Sarai treating her harshly. What is the whole idea of the harsh treatment when she did what she was supposed to be doing and have the baby? What's the issue of harsh treatment?
Correct. You're absolutely right, Nancy. Why would Sarah behave towards Hagar in this way when she's the one who set it up in the first place? She did this to herself. So why would she then? Because I'm guessing, like what other people said, Nancy, she didn't understand the significance of the consequences. She didn't understand the implications. And once she understood the implications, then she feels herself lowered. She sees something in Hagar lowering her. And by the way, I brought a midrash. Hopefully we're going to look at it in a minute, that kind of tries to answer some of the very questions that you're raising, Nancy, to make sense of this story, because it seems like Sarah's behaving in an inappropriate way, given that she set this whole thing up. Absolutely. Stan, and then more, and then maybe we'll take a look at the midrash that I gave you.
Yeah, I wanted to say that as Jews, we keep thinking about God and history, again, pardon me, especially our history. And we say we've been here for 3,500 years. And so there must be something of God in history that we've lasted this long. Of course, it depends when we look at history. If we looked at it during the period of the Islamic supremacy and the occupation and many other periods of history, and the Jews were not in such a good place. They were still around, of course, but we have to be careful when we look about, say this is history and this is what happens because these were descendants of and created Islam, or we're Jews and because of Abraham, and we have to be very careful in making these assertions.
For sure. Thank you for that cautionary note. Mort. Wait, Mort, you're muted. You got to unmute.
What constantly puzzles me as a religious person viewing this, don't you have to then assume that it's God's plan? Don't you start with that premise? That, or you just disregard that and now just take this from literally interpret it from an historical perspective, from a secular perspective. I think that's I'm not quite sure where you're coming from. If the perspective is that this was God's plan, then that leads us to very different conclusions. If you start looking at what legal codes existed at that time, what happened in a secular, that leads us in a very different direction. And that's what troubles me.
Look, God could have plans, but at the end of the day, God gave humans free will. And God allows us to do what we choose to do, whether it's God's plan or not. And God said to Abraham, you're going to be the father of a great nation. It was Abraham and Sarah figuring out what that looked like. And there could have been a better way to go about doing this than the way that they did it, according to this story. Let's take a look at the Midrash. It's not an easy Midrash, but I think it will, and it will surprise many of you. But this is what one of the earliest Midrashim on this Torah portion does to fill out the story. So he went into Hagar and she conceived. Rabbi Levi bar Haita said, she became pregnant at the first intimacy. Said Rabbi Elazar, a woman never conceives by the first intimacy. An objection is raised. Surely it is written, so both of Lot's daughters got pregnant by their father. In other words, a woman can conceive the very first time. This myth about a woman can't conceive the first time is not true. Then Rabbi Tanhuma comes along and says, well, wait a minute, but the case with Lot's daughters doesn't work because by an effort of willpower, they brought forth their virginity and conceived of the second act of intercourse. The first act is what they did to themselves. So in other words, what he's saying is no. They were intimate with themselves in order to get their egg flowing, and then they went to their father, so that doesn't count. So really the issue is that a woman can never conceive on the first time that she's intimate. That's the result of this back and forth. Said Rabbi Hanina ben Pazi, thorns are neither weeded nor sown, but they grow and spring up on their own. But how much suffering and effort for wheat to grow. That's a lovely metaphor, right? Isn't it? So why were the matriarchs barren? Rabbi Levi said in Rabbi Sheila's name and Rabbi Chelbo and Rabbi Yochanan's name, because the Holy One of Blessing yearns for their prayers and supplications. As it is written, "O my dove, you on the clefts of the rock, let me see your face, let me hear your voice." In other words, what God wants, the dove is the woman, and what God wants is the woman to pray to God to open up her womb. Why did I make you barren? In order to see your face and hear your voice. This is God talking. Rabbi Azariah said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan bar Papa, so that their husbands might cling to them in their beauty. That's why it takes women a long time to get pregnant. Rabbi Huna, in the name of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, said, so that they might pass the greater part of their life without hard work, right? He says it's hard for women to have children and raise those children. So they don't get pregnant in the beginning so they could have an easy life until they get pregnant. Rabbi Huna and Rabbi Avun, in the name of Rabbi Meir, say, so that their husbands might derive pleasure from them. For when a woman is with a child, she is disfigured and does not care for her appearance. Boy, these rabbis really don't understand women
They
at
haven't got a
all.
clue. They are so clueless.
For all the bases.
What are they, what period of time were these guys?
This is
1,000 years.
probably somewhere around, I think Breshit Rabbah is written somewhere around 600 CE. So, you know, it's a long time ago. And, you know, psychology is out the window. Emotional understanding of women out the window. There's a little bit left. The 90 years that Sarah did not bear, she was like a bride in her canopy. Ladies would come to ask how she was, and she would say to them, "Go and ask about the welfare of this wretched woman, Hagar." Hagar would tell them, "My mistress Sarai is not inside when she is outside. She appears to be righteous, but she is not righteous. Had she been a righteous woman, see how many years have passed without her conceiving, whereas I conceived in one night." Said Sarah, "Am I going to argue with this woman? I should argue with her master." So at the end, in this midrash, how does it fill up for us a deeper understanding of the conflict between Sarah and Hagar here? George.
Okay, I got something else to say. There's a lot of high school boys who may have believed the first part and got in trouble.
Yes, meaning that a woman
You know,
pregnant with her first moment.
they
of-
read the first part, not the second part. They should have
that,
studied more.
that is true.
But the other thing is, it's hard to follow this because, you know, a lot of the frum people, you know, they get married and they want to have kids. They don't say, geez, we don't want to have kids for 10 years. I mean, they want to, you know, get started right away. They're not saying, oh, we got to hold off, you know, for all these reasons. Let's have children.
But again, the rabbis are trying to have a deeper understanding of why it was that Sarah might not have gotten pregnant.
Yeah.
And
you can't wait till you're 90. That's not a good strategy.
Yes,
For most people.
they're trying to honor her beauty as a woman
Okay.
and say that God had other plans for her. God wanted to make her into a role model. But the way in which Hagar viewed her inability to get pregnant is what? How does Hagar view Sarah's inability to get pregnant? What does Hagar say about Sarah towards the end of this passage? Yeah, Rob. Wait, Rob, there you, I mean.
She seems to indicate that it's Sarah's fault, it's Sarai's fault, because she's not a nice person, and so God's punishing her for being such a no good Nick.
Exactly. Sarah isn't deserving of God's blessings. If women get pregnant immediately, like look at me, first time I, cohabitated, I got pregnant, Hagar is saying. Therefore, Sarah must not be deserving of children. And she's not deserving of children because she's not a righteous person. And, right, Sarah hears that. So this is filling in that space where when it says that Hagar lowered Sarah in her eyes, this was the moment. Right, where Sarah says she's not a righteous person. She's not deserving of children. God is punishing her because of her wickedness. And that makes, obviously, Sarah angry because in Sarah's mind, I'm not an unrighteous person. The reason that I didn't get pregnant, according to the Midrash, is for all these other reasons. God had other plans for me. God wanted to keep me beautiful. God wanted to be a role model of other women. God wanted my husband to come and have sex with me all the time, which he wouldn't have if I became unattractive. Again, in the mind of the rabbis, that's the way they view why Sarah doesn't get pregnant for so long. It has nothing to do with her being an unrighteous person. Other thoughts about this passage? If not, I think I have one more that will equally, interest you. So this one. Sarah says to Avram, my anger is on you. Rabbi Yudon says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda bar Shimon, you made violence on me with your words. Why? Because you heard me being despised and you were silent. In other words, Abraham hears Hagar speak disrespectfully to her master, Sarah, and Abraham does nothing, says nothing. In fact, Abraham says, hey, not my problem. It's your concubine. You take care of it. You gave her to me. Now you figure out how to deal with that. Rabbi Barachia, in the name of Rabbi Abba bar Kahana, said, I have a grievance against you. This is similar to two men who are imprisoned. And when the king passes through, one says, King, make justice for me. The king says to let him go. His companion said, I have a grievance against you. If you had said, make justice for us, both of us would be free. But since you said, make justice for me, he released you, but not me. So too, had you, Avraham, said, and we should just go childless, just as you got a child, I would have gotten a child. But since you said, I go childless, you received a child, but not I. So she's blaming Abraham for not including her in his prayers to God and only viewing Hagar as an opportunity for him to have a child, not for Sarah to have a child. So it challenges, this midrash challenges Elon's point, which he made earlier, which is to say that according to the rabbinic tradition, unlike Hammurabi's code, right here, this child would only be a child if Abraham agrees that it's a child of both of them and not just a child of his. And so Abraham was wrong. What do you think about these midrashim? Yes, Dan.
Well, I think that this story tells us that we have to be careful in our lives how we attribute cause and effect. That oftentimes we say this was the cause when it's really just only related one way or another. And that's what we're saying with this. These are the causes of what happened. We don't know.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. Any other last comments before we end class today? Yes, Linda.
You know, reading something like this, you as a rabbi hear a lot of stories from your congregation that the bitterest fights and the bitterest hates are between relatives. And you look at what's happening in the Middle East now, and I think the same story is given to us here in the story of Sarai and Hagar.
No question about it. When we look at geopolitical issues, if we take a minute, step back and say, these are really just issues amongst family, about the lack of trust, the lack of respect, the lack of honoring one another. And by the way, my comments are in no way reflecting the horrific crimes that Hamas committed against innocent Israelis. Do not read into that. That is not what I'm saying. But at the core of human conflict, I think Linda's point is very, very important.
They say that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference.
Exactly. It comes down to how we treat those who are closest to us and how we build communities of love based upon the closeness that we have and educate around that. And that's what we have failed to do today and failed to do even in these origin stories in our Torah. So thank you all. Great class.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Appreciate your comments, and I will look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right. Good day to all.